It was Christmas Eve, and the parking lot behind the old grocery store was nearly empty. The night was sharp, the kind of cold that sneaks through coat sleeves and bites at the fingertips, and I had to pull my scarf up over my nose just to keep from shivering. Snow crunched under my boots, each step sounding impossibly loud in the stillness, echoing off the empty concrete and chain-link fencing. I had stayed later than I usually did, finishing last-minute shopping, and the thought of the warm house waiting for me made my steps quicken. That's when I first noticed it, a shadow that didn't belong. It was subtle, the kind that your eyes almost ignore at first glance, but something about its movement set my nerves on edge. It wasn't cast by the few streetlights struggling to pierce the night or by the scattered cars. It was darker, heavier, almost deliberate, sliding across the icy ground like it had a will of its own. I stopped mid-step, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the lights, a patch of uneven snow or the reflection of a lamppost. But the shadow didn't pause. It mirrored me in ways that no other object could. When I veered left to avoid a patch of black ice, it followed. When I hesitated, breathing forming clouds in the cold air, it seemed to lean forward as if to study me, stretching across the asphalt in a way that made my stomach twist. I called out softly, "Hello," hoping for a laughable explanation, a late-night employee maybe, but the lot stayed empty. The silence was absolute, oppressive, the kind that presses into your chest and makes you wish for any sound, any company, no matter how small. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the car ahead. But each time I looked, it was there, always a step behind, a distorted reflection of my movements. My pulse was hammering now, the kind that makes your hands tremble, even as I gripped my shopping bag tighter. The headlights of my car glinted off the snow, casting long, distorted shadows of myself that wavered against the asphalt. But this one didn't belong. It was darker, denser, and it didn't stretch or shrink with the streetlights. It just stayed waiting. By the time I reached my car, I was breathing hard, chest tight. I fumbled with the keys, glancing over my shoulder more times than I can count. Every time I did, I caught it again, lingering at the far edge of the lot. I dared a blink, and it vanished, only to reappear when I let my gaze drift. I told myself it was a trick, my imagination running wild in the eerie solitude of Christmas Eve. But the feeling that something was watching, that it had been following me long before I saw it, made me uneasy in a way I couldn't shake. There was a coldness to it, an intelligence almost, as if the shadow knew exactly how to unsettle me, exactly where to appear. The engine roared to life beneath me, and I turned the heat on full blast, willing warmth into my stiff fingers and frozen cheeks. Even with the car lit up and the heater pushing warmth through the cabin, the sense of being observed didn't fade. I drove slowly out of the lot, glancing into every dark corner, scanning the periphery of the lot for movement. The streets were quiet, snow muffling the world, streetlights flickering in the icy wind. But I couldn't escape the impression that it had followed me, lingering at the edges of vision, just beyond the range of the headlights. I kept my speed low, refusing to let the shadows behind me merge with the darkness of the road, yet the unease stayed with me, gnawing at my mind with each turn. By the time I reached my street, familiar houses lined with twinkling Christmas lights offered some comfort. I parked and sat for a long moment, chest heaving, staring at the empty street. Even then, the shadow's presence lingered in my mind, echoing in the soft fall of snowflakes against the windshield. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the combination of exhaustion, the eerie quiet, and the chill had conjured a phantom in my mind. But when I reached the front door, fumbling with keys, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I paused, feeling a pressure in the cold night air, a presence in the corner of my awareness that I couldn't place. I swore I saw something slip past the frosted glass in the porch light's dim glow, just a movement at the edge of perception. My heart raced, and I bolted inside, shutting the door hard behind me. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the siding, seemed charged with a memory of that shadow. I found myself staring out the windows, expecting, or maybe fearing, its return. Even in the warmth, in the comforting glow of the Christmas tree lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had followed me further than the lot's boundaries, that it was patient enough to linger until I let my guard down. I kept hearing distant church bells, each toll a reminder of the empty lot, of the black form that had moved with a deliberate grace I couldn't explain. I couldn't tell if it had ever left, if it had slipped into the shadows beyond my sight, or if it existed only in the recesses of my mind, a product of fatigue and unease. The fear that maybe it was still out there, waiting, pressing against the edges of my vision, stayed with me in the quiet hours of Christmas morning. The day went on as if nothing had happened, neighbors greeting one another, the smell of baking in the air, children laughing outside. But in my memory, in the corners of my home where light didn't reach, the shadow waited, silent and patient, a reminder that some things are not meant to be fully understood, and that some darknesses follow long after we've thought ourselves safe. The sense of dread lingered for days, a constant itch at the back of my mind. Every late-night trip out of the house, every snow-covered lot, every empty street at Christmas Eve reminded me of that shape, that strange mimicry of my own movements. Friends joked about paranoia, exhaustion, and overactive imaginations, but I knew the difference between a shadow cast by light and a shadow that watches. The way it moved, the deliberate grace, the patient following, it wasn't human, and it wasn't entirely of this world, yet it didn't feel supernatural either. It was just there, waiting, watching, and I learned quickly not to look too long, not to dwell on its presence, because some things once seen can never truly be unseen. I never saw it again in the same lot, or at least not in a way I could confirm. But even months later, walking through other empty lots on quiet winter nights, my eyes flitted to the corners, to the edges of the streetlight's reach, and I felt it, the memory of that shadow pressing against the night, patient and silent, leaving me to wonder whether some darkness follows you not because it is bound to a place, but because it is bound to you. I was carrying a bag of gifts through a narrow alley between two houses, the glow of Christmas lights from the street barely spilling into the darkness. Snow had fallen lightly earlier, dusting the ground and rooftops in a fragile white blanket, but the alley itself was untouched, shadowed, and silent. My boots crunched softly on uneven pavement, the sound muted by the stillness around me. At first, I thought the shadows clinging to the brick walls were just tricks of the dim light, distortions caused by uneven bricks and sagging wires overhead, but then I noticed one that moved against the angle of the street lamps. It didn't stretch or bend with the contours of the walls. It crouched, stretched, and slid in ways that made no sense, almost deliberate, almost sentient. I froze, the bag slipping slightly in my hands, and my pulse started thumping like a drum in my chest. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the shadows played tricks when you walked alone at night, carrying the weight of Christmas errands and tiredness. But when I paused to catch my breath, I felt it then, not just saw it but felt it pressing at the edges of my awareness like the cold had something extra clinging to it. The alley seemed impossibly long all of a sudden, stretching further than I remembered, the walls pressing inward in the dark. Every instinct screamed at me to move, yet I felt rooted to the spot, caught between disbelief and unease. I started walking again, slow at first, then faster, trying to make it to the end where the street opened up into the warm glow of homes decorated for the holiday. That's when the shadows shifted again, moving along the brick with a grace that made my stomach twist. It wasn't running, wasn't chasing, but it was there, adjusting to me as I walked, matching my pace, its presence growing heavier with each step. My heart hammered in my chest, and my breath came fast and visible, puffing white into the cold air. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that it was just an optical illusion, but the rational explanations didn't fit the movements, the timing, or the pressure in the air that made my skin prickle. I broke into a run, bag bouncing against my hip, boots slipping against patches of ice and scattered leaves. The shadows slid after me, silent, patient, never faltering. The alley felt like a tunnel that had grown longer in the minutes I'd spent there, and the walls seemed closer, almost closing in. My lungs burned and my head spun, and I dared to glance back only once. It was there, crouched low to the ground, stretching in ways that made no sense, waiting, watching, almost enjoying the terror it instilled. I didn't look again, focusing on the faint glow of the main street ahead, praying for the comfort of lights and people. When I finally burst out of the alley onto the street, the warm glow of holiday lights and the distant hum of life should have comforted me, but the memory of that watcher clinging to the darkness stayed. Every lamp post looked weaker in comparison, every shadow suspicious. I kept my pace hurried but cautious, eyes scanning every corner, every doorway, half expecting it to slip out and follow me further. Even under the reassuring lights, I could still feel it pressing against the edges of perception. A cold, patient presence that made the familiar surroundings seem unfamiliar, threatening. I didn't see it again after that night, not in any alley or parking lot, but the feeling lingered. Nights afterward, even at home, I would catch myself pausing at the edge of a shadow, feeling the air chill just slightly, imagining that same crouching, stretching figure waiting silently. The rational part of me knew that alleys, shadows, and overactive imaginations make perfect companions for fear, especially alone at night carrying something as ordinary as a bag of Christmas gifts. But another part of me, the part that had felt it pressing through the cold air and the weight of the darkness, knew that some things follow you not because they are meant to be seen, but because they were there when your defenses were lowest, patient enough to linger in memory long after the event. Even weeks later, when I walked past that alley during the day, it felt narrower than I remembered, the bricks seeming darker, heavier, almost aware. The houses on either side, bright and festive, felt like a veneer over something indifferent to holiday cheer. I couldn't tell anyone what I'd felt or seen. Friends laughed off my story, attributing it to fatigue, snow, and imagination. But I could still remember the exact angle of the shadow, the way it slid silently across the wall, and the way my own fear had stretched time and space until the alley had no end. I learned to carry the unease quietly, a silent knowledge that some shadows aren't cast by light, that some presences don't announce themselves with noise or form. They are patient, waiting for the smallest lapse, the briefest moment of attention, and then they slip into your perception, altering your understanding of a familiar world. I've never been back to that alley at night since, and yet sometimes when I walk past a narrow gap between houses or a darkened corner on a quiet street, I feel that same pressure in the air, the same cold weight pressing against the back of my neck, and I remember the silent watcher, crouched and still, moving in ways that made no sense, waiting. The night left me with a lesson I couldn't unlearn. The world is full of shapes and movements that don't belong to us, and sometimes, even the faintest, quietest presence can be enough to remind you of how fragile your sense of safety is. I didn't see it again, I didn't hear it, and I didn't touch it, but I felt it, and feeling, I learned, is sometimes far more disturbing than seeing. I was decorating the front window with candles, lining them carefully along the sill so the warm glow would spill softly into the night, casting gentle light onto the freshly fallen snow outside. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you and presses into the bones, broken only by the occasional sigh of the wind through the trees. That's when I first saw it in the reflection, a shadow moving against the glow of the candles inside. At first, I thought it was my own reflection warped by the glass, my hands reaching over the sill, shoulders bent as I adjusted the ornaments on the tree behind me. But the movements didn't match mine. It was subtle, a flicker, a shifting darkness that seemed to lean forward and retreat on its own accord, deliberate but unervingly patient. I froze, the soft crackle of the candle flames filling the sudden void of sound around me, and my stomach tightened. I stepped back instinctively, rubbing my eyes, thinking I was seeing things, exhausted from the day's errands and decorating. But when I glanced again, it was closer, more defined, a shadow without form, yet impossible to mistake. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, trying to trace a neighbor's silhouette outside, the quiet street barely illuminated by the weak glow of a distant lamppost. But the street was empty, the snow pristine and untouched, not a footprint to suggest life had passed that way. A shiver ran down my spine, a slow creeping chill that had nothing to do with the cold outside. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the reflection of candle flames bending oddly against the window pane, but that rational thought felt hollow in the pit of my stomach. Hours passed, and I continued decorating, trying to force normalcy, but the shadow remained, patient, almost waiting. Even when I blew out the candles, leaving the room dark except for the faint glow of the streetlights outside, it lingered in the glass, staring back at me. I tried to convince myself that it would fade, that the warmth and safety of my home should keep it away. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, made tea, and sat staring at the reflection, each flicker of movement twisting my stomach tighter. I avoided direct eye contact with the glass, yet I couldn't stop noticing it out of the corner of my eye, shifting imperceptibly, growing darker when I wasn't looking directly at it. Sleep didn't come that night. Every sound seemed amplified, the creak of the floorboards as the house settled, the whisper of the wind rattling the window panes, the faint hum of the heating system. I imagined the shadow lurking in every reflective surface, patient and silent, watching while I tried to ignore it. I dared not turn on more lights, afraid the brightness would chase it away only to return in the dark corners once I turned my back. Hours crawled by, each one heavier than the last, until dawn broke faintly through the thin curtains. I didn't look at the window then, not immediately. The reflection of the morning sun seemed pale and reassuring, but the memory of the shadow pressing against the darkened glass kept me tense, eyes darting to every polished surface in the room. Christmas morning came, bright and cheerful outside, with children laughing and neighbors bustling about, yet the shadow remained inside my memory, unshakable, a silent witness to the holiday. I tried to tell myself it had been nothing, a momentary trick of my mind, fueled by exhaustion and the eerie stillness of Christmas Eve. But that sense of being watched lingered, settling over me like a weight I could not lift. Every reflective surface in the house seemed suspect: the kitchen window, the mirror in the hallway, the polished wood of the dining table. I could feel the pressure in the air as if it had never really left, a reminder that some things don't need form to unsettle. Days passed, but I could not entirely rid myself of the feeling. Each night, the reflection returned in my mind's eye, a patient observer waiting just beyond reach. I avoided standing near windows after dark, but the unease followed, seeping into quiet moments, into the creak of floorboards or the shadowed corner of a room. It wasn't fear of a person, exactly. There was no face, no figure, but a presence, a patient weight that seemed to know the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I tried to laugh it off to myself, but even the effort felt hollow. There was an unshakable certainty that whatever had lingered in the glass that night had found a way to imprint itself upon me, to ride the edges of perception long after the moment had passed. Even weeks later, when I looked at windows during the day, the memory was there, twisting in the light. The reflection of passers-by and branches swaying outside seemed to carry hints of that same movement, subtle and deliberate. I could not forget the way it had leaned forward and retreated, waiting for me to notice, patient in its observation. My own reflection began to feel wrong, distorted, as if some part of it had been replaced by something else that watched silently, silently following. I never saw it again with certainty. Not the same shadow in the same place, but the memory stayed. I learned quickly that some presences don't announce themselves, don't make noise or give form. They linger at the edges of perception, patient and unyielding, and once you notice them, it's impossible to unsee. Even now, when a reflective surface catches my eye unexpectedly, I pause, half expecting the shadow to be there, patient as ever, waiting for the quietest moment to return. The unease never fully fades. It lingers like a quiet hum beneath the normal rhythm of life, a reminder that even the brightest holidays cannot fully chase away certain darknesses.